Welcome back to the Eldritch Stronghold. I'm Mitchell, or the Guru you knew, and this is DeckSesh. So in 2024, we got a lot of commanders within precons, within the set, especially with foundations and Jumpstart Foundation set. So I just wanted to pretty much talk about my favorite deck of last year. After thinking of all the commanders that I did end up building and actually playing, the one I had the most fun with is Bellow, Bard of the Brambles. He's a 3-mana, 3/3 Raccoon Bard that during your turn, each non-equipment artifact and non-aura equipment you control with mana value 4 or greater is a 4/4 elemental creature in addition to its other types and has indestructible haste, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. I've always been a fan of Gruul, Stompy type commanders. This commander does it in a really cool way with artifacts and enchantments. Built it more of an enchantress way for my build, and we're going to jump into it right now. First bunch of cards we'll be talking about are enchantments. This deck is an enchantress deck, so you want a bunch of enchantments. There's plenty of them. This whole deck sesh will be full of them, but this group is just a couple of my favorites. So the first one we'll talk about is Sandworm Convergence. It's an 8-mana enchantment, but creatures with flying can't attack you or planeswalkers you control. So there's not a lot of reach in this deck, so this helps protect against flyers. But at the beginning of your end step, you also create a 5/5 worm creature token. And then Bella will also make this a 4/4 indestructible haste creature. The next card we'll talk about is Omen Path Journey. It's a 4-mana enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you search your library for up to 5 lands that have a different name, exile and then shuffle. At the beginning of your end step, you can choose a card at random, exiled with this card, and put it on the battlefield tapped. So it's just a really fun ramp spell that will also be a 4/4 indestructible haster. It's any lands too, which is kind of cool, so you can get all your fancy lands, and then you're guaranteed for the next 5 end steps to get another land tapped. The next card is Beldum. It's a 4-mana enchantment that says creatures can't block. This one's a very, very dangerous one, but a very fun one. You're going to put it down, and you can't block either, but you got a lot of haste, indestructible boys. You might win that fight. Next one is Overlord of the Boiler Village. Not really sure if I pronounced that right, but anyway, it's a 6-mana 5/5 Avatar Horror. It has impending 4, but when it enters the battlefield or attacks, it deals 4 damage to any target. So the fancy thing about in this deck, you cast him, Bellow's going to make him a 4/4 indestructible with haste, so he's going to enter, deal 4 damage to somebody, attack, deal another 4 damage to somebody, and then also be attacking for 4 damage. So you can actually hit each one of your opponents just by casting this thing. The last card we'll be talking about is Weaver of Harmony. It's a 2-mana 2/2 Snake Druid. Other enchantment creatures you control get +1/+1, and you can pay green, tap it, and copy target activated or trigger ability you control from an enchantment source, and you may choose new targets for that copy. This thing gets pretty cool, pretty crazy in this deck with some cards we're going to talk about later. Next couple cards we'll talk about, we don't play a lot of them, but artifacts. So the first one is Solemn Simulacrum. It is a 4-mana golem. It's a 2/2 and enters. You search for a basic land, put on the battlefield tapped, and when it dies, you draw a card. Everybody knows this. We know him as Sad Robot, but in this deck, he's probably even a happy robot. He becomes a 4/4 indestructible in haste, so he's even more useful than he was before. The next card is Skitter Beam Battalion. It's a 9-mana artifact construct, but you can pay 5 for the prototype and make it a 2/2. It has trample and haste, but when it enters a battlefield, if you cast it, you create 2 tokens that are copies of it. So with Bellow, this thing's always going to be a 4/4 indestructible haste on your turn. So you can cast it for that prototype cost, and you're going to get 3 copies of it. So that's 12 damage over 3 creatures, and they're all indestructible in haste. The next card is Niv's Disc. It's a 4-mana artifact. It enters tapped, but you can pay 1, tap it, and destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. Usually this is downside for all players, but since on your turn your artifacts and enchantments are indestructible, you actually don't really see any negative sides from running this. The next card is Reaver Titan. It's a 7-mana artifact. It's a vehicle. It's a 10/10. Has protection from mana value 3 or less. But just like the Overlord we had, when this attacks, it deals 5 damage to each opponent. And you can crew it for 4. But we don't gotta worry about the crew because our commander's already going to make this a 4/4. And so you cast this, it's a 4/4. You swing with it. Each opponent takes 5, and then one unlucky opponent's also going to have a 4/4 swinging at him that has protection against mana value 3 or less. The last card is Netherlord's Ship. It's a 4-mana vehicle with flying. When it enters the battlefield, you exile target player's graveyard. And when this deals combat damage to a player, you may put a creature card exiled with this onto the battlefield under control. It also has crew, you don't got to worry about it. Comes in, exiles somebody's graveyard, probably the player with the biggest or maybe the more creatures in it. And then you attack that player with a 4/4 indestructible haste and flying, and hopefully it gets through and you can play some free creatures. The next group of cards really show off why I really like playing Bellow. When you play or when you cast an artifact or enchantment with Bellow on the battlefield, they enter as a creature, so it lets you take abuse of some of these cards we're about to talk about. The first one is Molting Echoes. It's a 4-mana enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. You're going to choose elementals for this because that's what your creatures become with Bellow. And whenever a non-token creature of the chosen type enters the battlefield under your control, you can create a token that's a copy of that creature. Token gains haste and you exile at the beginning, so you do lose a token, but you're going to get doubled up on your tokens. The next one is Echoing Assault. It's a 5-mana enchantment with creature tokens you control have Menace, which is beautiful. And whenever you attack a player, you choose a target non-token creature that's attacking a player. You create a copy that's a 1/1, and that token enters attacking the player, and you got to sacrifice it. Again, you don't get to keep it, but you get an additional attacker, and if that attacker has an enter and an attack trigger, like the Reaver Titan or the Overlord, it's going to get that's either going to double up. Next one is Flame Shadow Conjuring. It's a 4-mana enchantment. Another thing to mention is all these are also going to be 4/4 indestructible haste creatures themselves. Whenever a non-token creature enters a battlefield under your control, you may pay 1. If you do, you get a token copy of it. It gains haste and you got to exile it. It's sad you don't really get to keep any of these tokens, but just having the additional attackers being indestructible's haste, you really can't lose with these additional effects. The next one is Mirror March. It's a 6-mana enchantment, and whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you flip a coin until you lose. For each flip that you win, you get a token copy of it that has haste, and you exile it. This one could be, you could get 0 on the flips, which does suck, but it's still going to be a 4/4 attacker, so I think it's really worth the include in this deck. The last one is my favorite because you actually get to keep these tokens, and is Bramble Sovereign. This one's not an enchantment, so it doesn't become a creature, but it is already a 4/4 creature. But whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield, you may pay 2. If you do, that creature's controller creates a token copy of it, so you can even give your opponent an extra creature of theirs if you're feeling a little generous. Now we got all these 4/4 indestructible haste, we got all these token copies of it. Now it's time for some brutal combat. The first card we're going to talk about is Berserker's Onslaught. It's a 5-mana enchantment, and attacking creatures you control have double strike. It's clean and it's simple, and this card will be a 4/4 to join on with the fun. The next card is Gratuitous Violence. 2-mana or 5-mana enchantment. Wish it was 2 mana. If a creature you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage instead. There's a lot of damage doublers, but I really like this one because it's only stuff you control. The next one is Unnatural Growth. It is a 5-mana enchantment, and at the beginning of each combat, you double the power and toughness of each creature you control until the end of the turn. This is pretty cool. Just makes your 4/4s 8/8s and makes itself an 8/8. Bigger creatures, bigger damage. Next one is Street Riot. It's a 5-mana enchantment. As long as it's your turn, creatures you control gets +1/0 and have trample. Trample's a big one you want in this. I like this one because it gives a little power bonus as well as the trample. But you definitely want to put like Nylea, the god of the hunt's a good one too. It's also an enchantment. And trample's just really, really needed because if you're just attacking with a bunch of 4/4s, indestructible and haste, and they just got shove blockers, you're not really making headway. Last card is Gruul Warchant. It's a 4-mana enchantment. Attacking creatures you control get +1/+0 and Menace. Menace is really good, along with the double strike, double damage, double power, and trample. This deck gets really, really crazy. So I did call it an Enchantress deck. So the next cards we're going to talk about are Enchantress type effects. So the first one is Eidolon of Blossoms. It's a 4-mana 2/2 spirit. Whenever it or another enchantment enters the battlefield, you draw a card. I like that it's an ETB trigger, and I like the fact that it also will be a 4/4 indestructible and haste creature with our commander's ability. Our next one is just Enchantress Presence. It's a 3 mana enchantment. Whenever you cast an enchantment, you draw a card. This one's on cast and not on enter, but it's an enchantment itself, so it will trigger the other ones. The next Enchantress is going to keep getting bigger and bigger because whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on her and you draw a card. So not only are you drawing a card, you're going to make this creature bigger and bigger and bigger, and hopefully just be able to join in on the attacking. The next one is Wild Seer Scoring Maw. It's a 5 mana 6/6 elemental wolf. Has trample, and enchantment spells you cast have cascade. So a lot of your enchantments you're going to be casting in this deck are bigger mana cost in order to work with Bellow. So you're going to be cascading for 5, 6, and you're just going to be getting some more free spells, and who doesn't like that? The next one is Composer of Springs. It's a 2 mana 1/3 Bard. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, you put a land from your hand on the battlefield tapped. That's pretty good. But if you have 6 or more enchantments, which is really likely in this deck, instead you may put a creature or a land card from your hand on the battlefield tapped. So free creatures and free lands are pretty cool. So I really like this deck. It's powerful, and it uses enchantments and artifacts in a way that other decks don't by making them creatures, obviously. And the fact that they're indestructible in haste is just nasty. So like always, just tell me if you've built this deck and you like it, and what was your favorite deck of 2024. And I can't wait to see what commanders are brought to us this year. And you guys have a great night.